Would you believe me if I said I got abducted by aliens? So, hi everyone, I am Galatea and welcome back to my channel. This video on evil sorceresses, well, sorceresses in general, some evil, some not, was supposed to be out before Halloween. It is now mid-February. I did film it before Halloween. I filmed it directly after I filmed the video on Sorcerers, but because it's taken me so long, I thought I might as well refilm it, and also I was trying to edit it the other day, and I was watching the video, and I was annoying me, so I can't imagine how irritated other people will get. I mean, I was annoying myself with, I was talking really slowly as well, and it was winding me up. I don't know, I just didn't like it. I didn't like the final product. I found myself irritating and grating, so I thought I'd better refilm it, and also because this video is so late and it was Halloween themed, the one I did, and I still have pumpkins behind me, and we're now in February, and I thought that would be kind of stupid to put up a Halloween themed video. I'm not going to continue with the explanations, I'm just going to get into the video because that's why you're here. So, as I said, this is a part 2 video. The part 1 is on sorcerers, and although, yeah, it's technically a different category, it's still related, so this video will make a lot more sense if you have seen the first video, so I will link that down below. I realise it's been a long time since I released that one, so yeah, probably a lot of things have been forgotten from then anyway, and I'm sorry about that. But yeah, this is continuing on from that, so there's a lot of useful information in the sorcerers video, and there's some stuff in here that probably won't make as much sense if you haven't seen the first video, but whatever, that's neither here nor there, you can just watch this one if you want. Cool. So I'm going to start now. So as I said, this video will be talking mainly about sorceresses, as I've already gone over, and as I've established in the first video, if you can remember 4 months ago, most sorceresses want to be adored. They use emotions and temptation. Their motto would be, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Most of them anyway, so that's their kind of general vibe. Another interesting representation of the sorceress, as I said in the first video, is that of complete and unbalanced chaos, hysteria, and insanity. Also unpredictability, I'd say, while the sorcerer equivalent, as gone over in the first video, is like total control and order. In my opinion anyway, is how I see them represented. And as I said in the first video, a sorceress does not have to be female and a sorcerer doesn't have to be male. It's not about gender but the way in which they work. I'd also say that in general sorceresses work more through an understanding of people, through like feel and intuition, really understanding people's deepest desires, whereas sorcerers sort of work more through, I guess, threats and domination and do this because I say so, I'd say. So in the Western world, one of the most famous examples of a temptress, of a woman as a temptress, would be Eve from the Bible, of course, eating the forbidden fruit and tempting Adam to do the same. And though she's definitely sort of a temptress, or portrayed as a temptress, I wouldn't say she's a sorceress. The serpent, though, who tempted Eve, I'd say is definitely a sorceress. So he tempts her to eat the apple, promising great things, promising her knowledge, all this stuff. His ultimate aim being that of chaos, and he leaves chaos in his wake as the result of, you know, eating the apple. So of course the evil queen from Snow White is of course a nod to this biblical story. She defeats Snow White by tempting her with a delicious looking apple, which of course turns out to be poisoned. I think the apple itself is a really good symbol, I guess, or way to describe sorceresses in general. So on the outside, what they offer you seems to be dazzling, irresistible, delicious, all your greatest desires, everything you ever wanted. But on the inside, it is blackened and foul fruit, rotten to the core, poisoned gift. So one of the biggest differences is that a sorcerer would get people to do things by saying, I command you to do this, whereas I think a sorceress would probably get people to do things by saying, you know you want to. So, persuasion rather than orders, I think. So in the classic movie All About Eve, which is a fantastic film, and you should watch it if you haven't, we have a brilliant example of a sorceress. So Eve, the title character, though not really the main character, is at the beginning, a pretty nobody. She's got looks, perhaps a bit of talent, but she's unknown, and her greatest dream is to become a famous actress. And through her wide-eyed innocence, charm, and apparent sweetness, she manages to worm her way into the life of a famous actress. Once there, she begins to manipulate whoever she can, screwing over whoever she has to in order to make it to the top in Hollywood. And almost nobody, except the said actress, can see through her facade to who she really is, or past the spell, as it were, that she's cast to see the selfish nature of who she really is. Double Indemnity, another classic film and another brilliant film, also has a very good example of a sorceress. So the woman in this manages to expertly manipulate the men around her to get them to do what she wants, and to get what she wants while keeping her hands clean. In the first half in the sorcerer video, that to be a sorcerer or a sorceress, you don't have to have magical powers in order to fit the archetype. It's not about that. Magic does help. There are of course sorcerers and sorceresses who have magical powers in books, but you don't have to. Like those two examples I just named, Eve and, I can't remember her name, the character in Double Indemnity, are not like, don't have magic powers, but they're very much a sorceress. And that's the other thing I think that separates a sorcerer from a sorceress. In a lot of cases with a sorcerer, it's kind of obvious what they are. Everyone knows what they are. They're the bad guy, or they're very clearly a tyrant. They're not really pretending to be anything else. And that's not a blanket rule by any means, but in a lot of cases that seems to be what happens. Whereas with a sorceress, in almost all cases, how she works is that you don't know that she's the bad guy, or she manages to appear something that she's not. She tricks people around her into deceit, I'd say, and like appearing as something different. So another really good example is from the novel by Daphne du Maurier, Rebecca, which is a fantastic book. I've actually got it here. I'm not gonna do this with everyone, it's just because it's literally right here. This novel from Rebecca, which is fantastic. Read it if you haven't. Yeah, so Rebecca from the novel of the same name she's another woman who was so irresistible to those around her. Not just in looks, as I said in the first video, being a sorceress is not just about being pretty and being able to tempt in that way. It's about intelligence more than anything else. So, as I said, Rebecca, she's so irresistible to those around her, not just because of her looks, but mainly because of her intelligence, her charisma, and who she was, that she managed to build a brilliant life for herself. Not only this, but in a slightly supernatural turn of events, as we read throughout the novel, it even seems almost like Rebecca was so powerful that she can influence people from beyond the grave. So strong is her willpower, her personality, that she, whether through her own intentions or the protagonist's imagination, manages to create chaos in our protagonist's life. Manages to play on her emotions and insecurities to get inside her head and still be remembered and worshipped and still influence the world. Even by someone who never even met her and after she's died. She's that powerful. And as I said, not all of these sorceresses, the examples I'm giving, are necessarily evil, but they have elements of a sorceress. So I think Daisy from The Great Gatsby is another pretty good example of a sorceress. She's the sort of person who needs to be adored by everyone in the room that she's in, you know, be they man or woman. And that's another thing you see with sorceresses, this need for adoration. And why is that? Well, because that's where their power lies, in people falling in love with them, whether romantically or otherwise. That's where, and with Daisy from The Great Gatsby, that's where her power and her ability to control people comes from. And Daisy sure as hell leaves a lot of chaos around her as well. Mrs. Coulter from the Northern Lights novel, also known as The Golden Compass, she takes the sorceress's motto of "you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar" to heart. In this case, the flies, of course, being children. We also have a very classic example, Lady Macbeth. One of the most famous sorceresses of all time. Again, not technically a sorceress with magical powers, but she uses manipulation and plays on Macbeth's insecurities in order to get what she wants. And it's her that's the driving force, really, of the plot, not Macbeth. And then in mythology, of course, mythology is filled with sorceresses. We have sirens who sing men to their deaths, and sorceresses like Circe, who turned men into pigs, and things of that nature. There are many, many sorceresses to be found in mythology. And again, the way Circe did it, she's the one who holds like an amazing feast and tempts all the men to come and sit down and eat all this amazing food, and then they turn into pigs in Greek mythology. And of course that's very much a sorceress method. Rather than just going, haha, I've got you now, you're trapped on this island, it's like pretending to be something she's not and tempting them with all this delicious food that actually turns out to be, at least if not poisoned, then under a curse. So they all turn into pigs and are trapped in that way, rather than her just being a tyrant and saying You gotta stay here. Dorian Gray, I'd say, is an example of a male sorceress. He's a young man who gave up everything to be beautiful. Or, if not to be beautiful, because he was already beautiful, to keep his beauty and youth. And many years beyond his sell-by date. And he then used that beauty to get people to adore him and corrupt them. He leaves a trail of heartbroken lovers in his wake, which is a very sorceress thing to do. He is loved, and he uses that to control rather than using fear as a sorcerer would. Yeah, so it's Dorian Gray certainly a sorceress rather than a sorcerer, and that's another like key thing, difference between them. I'd say a sorcerer works through fear, whereas a sorceress, I wouldn't say through love, but through some twisted form of adoration, I guess. Voldemort is a really interesting example in the fact that in his childhood he was a sorcerer, he became a sorceress in his young adult years, went through Hogwarts when he was a teenager, and he transitioned back into a sorcerer again in adulthood. By this I mean that as an adult and a child, he used fear to control and dominate people. In his teenage and young adult years, he relied quite heavily on the methods of a sorceress. He was not only a very handsome young man, but he was also charming and charismatic, expertly manipulating his fellow students and teachers and people around him. Playing on their emotions so skillfully, he got almost all of them to adore him, to break rules for him, to have undying loyalty towards him. Yes, as an adult, he ruled mainly through threat and fear, but when he was young and building up his following, he did it by getting people to love him and believe in him. Bellatrix Lestrange is also a sorceress. She's a sorceress, though, who has given in totally to chaos. She leaves chaos in her wake and has been known to torture people into insanity, and herself could be described as pretty mad. So, let's talk about Peter Baelish, or Littlefinger, from Game of Thrones. Not only does he, and again, for these next points, I mentioned these in the first video about what makes someone a sorcerer or a sorceress. I think there were like 7 different qualities that defines the archetype of what makes a character a sorcerer. So what I'm going to list here is from that list, and I'm sorry, I know the video was made ages ago, but I have mentioned it in the first video. So yeah, not only does Littlefinger have a beyond normal ability to watch people, even from afar, due to his network of spies, one of the sorcerer traits as mentioned in the first video, but he also cleverly manipulates people and events, stirring the pot to get things to turn out how he wants them. He certainly works behind the scenes, using dishonesty and trickery to achieve his aims which, when you get right down to it, are only really about making himself more powerful. Littlefinger has that quality of the sorceress where you can't quite tell what his aim is, who he's working for. Unlike a sorcerer where it's very much like, this is what I want, this is how it's going to happen, you're all going to do as I say, he's got that sort of slightly shapeshifter quality of the sorceress where you don't quite know what he wants, what he's working for, apart from himself and making himself more powerful, and it seems to be that he doesn't even really care who becomes king. Doesn't seem to really care about which side is winning. And just so long as he stays rich and powerful, and it seems like he would betray almost anyone in order to keep that power and wealth and get more. People are pawns to Peter Baelish, and he pushes them where he wants them. And as I said, though Peter Baelish is not really a sorcerer in my opinion, he's very much a sorceress, and if you look at sort of what he does in general and his personality in general, he deals quite a lot in temptation, and not only because he runs a whorehouse. He doesn't seem to get angry if people around him don't obey his every command. He's not a tyrant in that way, but he's a sorceress in that he seems to work solely through the realm of desire. He convinces people to do what he wants them to do. He doesn't really order them. His power isn't really to be found in the physical world, and I went over that in the first video again. Take what he did to Lisa Arryn, for example. I never know how it's pronounced. Is it Lisa or Lisa Arryn? You know what I mean. Her. And mild spoilers here until I put my hand down. Maybe a little bit more than mild spoilers. Anyway, so he pretended he was in love with her, played on her emotions to get her to do what he wanted, and then, quite coldly, he killed her. If he had been a sorcerer, he would have been a dominating tyrant of a husband, commanding her, do what I say or else. But Peter, that's not his way. And his way was to convince her to do what he wanted, and in that way preserve his, well, perhaps not his image of innocence. I don't think anyone ever has believed he's innocent, but in that sense anyway, to preserve that. He's also he muddies the water quite a lot. He seems to leave chaos, which again is sort of what a sorceress tends to do. I swear, is there a quote as well from Game of Thrones either the book or the TV show, I can't remember which one, where he says something about, he has a quote about chaos or something. Anyway, but yeah, he seems to, a little bit of a chaotic trickster figure. Cathy and Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights are a brilliant example of a sorcerer and sorceress duo. They're also a brilliant example of terrible, selfish people in a toxic relationship, but that's neither here nor there. They were a match for each other. I'd say each other's equals, but they both ended up marrying different people. People they could control. Cathy ended up managing to control her husband through manipulation and getting him to adore her, whereas Heathcliff controlled his wife through violence and getting her to fear him. Cathy and Heathcliff were almost in a permanent struggle for dominance over each other, trying to always one-up each other. They had different methods of going about it, different methods of working, but I'd say it's quite interesting example of, I guess, the traditional sorcerer archetype versus the traditional sorceress archetype, when they're like, you don't often, I guess, see them in the same story locked in battle like that. Battle or love, either one, apparently. Tractor again. So going back to Game of Thrones, the Red Priestess is another great example of a sorceress, and she might well be, she's one of the only ones I've mentioned so far who's a sorceress in the sense that she actually has magical powers, this one. She also uses threats, yes, like burning people who disagree with her. So in that aspect there's a little bit of a sorcerer element, but mainly she works through, the main way she really gets her power is through temptation, not only because she's beautiful. In the relationship between her and Stannis, who is the king, she seems to have more power. She's the driving force behind almost every decision he makes, everything that happens, everything he does. Even though he's the king, supposedly the one calling the shots, it's her, the true power behind the throne, as it were. She does this not only by tempting Stannis with her beauty and her body, but also because she can offer him more than that, because through her visions, her magical powers, she promises that she can really make him king, get him a crown and all this stuff. And by doing that, by promising him what he desires, she gets him to do a hell of a lot of horrific stuff that goes against a lot of what he previously believed. Also from Game of Thrones we have power-obsessed Cersei. Though initially she seems like a sorceress, so this is a good example of where the difference comes in. It's not so easy to say, oh, she's a beautiful woman, therefore she must be a sorceress. It's never about that. So even though Cersei initially, at first glance, seems like a sorceress, she's an outstanding beauty and she sleeps with people to get what she wants in a lot of cases, she's not. I think she's always been more of a sorcerer. Her methods are almost always based on threats and fear and being a tyrant than they are on temptation. Of course she's a mixture of the two, just like most of them. There's hardly any characters are either one or the other, but she does fall more on the sorcerer side, in my opinion. And then, to contrast this, Marjorie Tyrell, on the other hand, also from Game of Thrones, also outstandingly beautiful, is, in my opinion, 100% a sorceress. So she very much works in the way that sorceress does. And I'm not saying that Marjorie is necessarily evil. At worst, she's morally ambiguous, perhaps a bit misguided and selfish. I wouldn't say evil, but power hungry. I'd say. She seems definitely to be power hungry, and she does use the methods of a sorceress to get what she wants. She gets the whole kingdom to adore her, and it seems that men and women alike trust her and love her. And so accomplished is Marjorie at manipulation, at tempting people with promises of delight and joy, at this whole innocent act and getting people to believe her and want to look after her and give her what she wants, that for a lot of the series she has one of the most evil villains, it seems. Maybe not completely wrapped around her little finger, but she's a lot of the way there with him and can handle him a hell of a lot better than most people can, just through temptation and tricking him into thinking that he has the power, really, in their dynamic, when it's not so clear that he does, because she seems to get what she wants a lot of the time. It's one of her greatest tricks that she manages to do, is making the people that she comes into contact with believe that they have all the power and she's just this sweet, innocent and obedient beauty, a very demure lady and a good and honest and a very well-behaved wife, when it's not quite so simple as that. So going back to the more magical side to sorceresses, ones who have real magic, we have the other mother in Neil Gaiman's Coraline. And this is a good example of how a sorceress's power does not come from beauty, it comes from temptation. So the other mother lures Coraline into this other dimension. She's wearing the face of Coraline's real mother, only a more relaxed and fun-loving version of her. She promises Coraline attention, affection, fun and magic, on the incredibly creepy condition that Coraline sews buttons into her eyes and stays in her world forever. She knows exactly what Coraline's deepest wishes and dreams are, and she dangles these in front of her as a way to control her. Her world itself, the worlds that the other mother creates, that Coraline steps through the portal into, this other world, the other mother's world, is also a really good example of the world of the sorceress, I believe. It's sort of magical, nonsensical, confusing, and a little bit horrifying as well. So, chaos, in other words. It's a little bit chaotic. Morgana Le Fay from Arthurian legend is another example of a sorceress. Interestingly, in the earliest stories, she's actually not a bad guy. In the earliest stories, she was a helper. She helped out Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and was a good guy. It was only after then she began to be associated with an evil, villainous woman, this awful sorceress who created horror and pain for Arthur and his knights and all that jazz. And then in recent stories, she morphs between being a powerful heroine and an empowered woman and a devious temptress, depending on the preference of the writer. But she's certainly got a long literary reputation of being a sorceress, and it would be, I think, a great oversight not to include her in this video, even though her sorceress origins are a little bit muddied, and I'm not sure I'd define her as an evil sorceress. In some tales where she is evil, and she's portrayed as evil, she seduces her own half-brother, of course, in order to be the mother of the heir to the throne. And in other stories, she's Arthur's saviour, one of the women who takes his body to rest in Avalon until he is needed in Britain again, which I'm still waiting for. I actually quite like this element to Morgana Le Fay, and this makes her very much a sorceress, really, in the sense that she's very hard to define. You can't pin her down. Is she a good guy or is she a bad guy? I think that in itself is a very sorceress quality, of not really knowing what their true motivations are, not really knowing if they are this awful, devious villain, or if they're just misunderstood and whatever else, yeah, or a good guy, you know? So in that sense, the whole history that goes with Morgana Le Fay is very much, I guess, the history of a sorceress, evil or otherwise. But I think that everyone can agree that whatever her motivations, in whatever sense she's portrayed, either as a good guy or a bad guy, in either incarnation of her, she's not someone that you'd want as your enemy, because in almost every story, whether good or bad, she almost always is powerful. So there was a TV series, Camelot, a few years ago, which was cancelled after one series, and I can understand why. It wasn't great, and I think it was poorly cast. Having said that, one character I think they really got right was Eva Green, who portrayed Morgana Le Fay, and she's the kind of actress, I think she was just born to play Morgana, really, or Morgan, as she's called in that particular series. Anyway, not talking about the merits of that series, so I'll leave that aside. But Eva Green in the series anyway, she does quite a fabulous job of portraying the darker side of Morgana. Or as I said, Morgan, as she's called in that show. In this story, she is a sorceress through and through. Power-hungry, manipulative, proud, a little mad, and leaving chaos in her wake. She shapeshifts her personality, first becoming King Lot's ideal woman, cruel, irresistible, and fearless, in order to win his loyalty and therefore win his army. And then she wears a different mask around her brother Arthur, showing herself to be the kind, caring sister that he's always wanted. She promises them both things that she has no intention of giving. And then she later uses magic and literal shapeshifting to cement her power. So there's a series of books called the Nightmare Academy books, and I realise not a lot of people would have read them or heard of them, I'm guessing. So bear with me, I'll give a little bit of explanation on them. These books, so the Nightmare Academy books, they're stories about children who fight the, quote, things that go bump in the night. Children who fight nightmare monsters, kind of, is the thing. But in these books, they have let's call her a queen of monsters, appearing in later books, at the end of the second book, who I would certainly classify as a sorceress. So again, as I don't think many people would really have read or even heard of these books, I'm going to do my best to give a little bit of an explanation, because I think that she's a really good example, actually, of a sorceress, this character. And so good because it's contrasted with an example of sorcerers. So this Queen of the Monsters, before she arrived at the end of book 2, the monster world was ruled by four kings of the monsters. They were all male. It is in this contrast between her and the male kings that we see the differences between sorcerers and sorceresses quite clearly. The four males ruled their monster kingdoms with brutality and violence. The monsters who served them were loyal to them, but there is never anything to suggest that they were affectionate towards their masters, as their masters had no issue killing them if they got in the way. And literally got in the way. If there was one walking in front of them or underneath them, they'd have no issue standing on them and killing them, these little monsters. So as I said, at the end of the second book, the Queen of the Monsters is summoned from another world, another dimension, a creature who calls herself, and commands everyone else call her, mother. She is even the mother to the four kings, these four monster kings who, even though they are so brutal throughout the books and have never shown subservience to anyone, particularly not each other, they become adoring and fawning before her, subservient before her, and behaviour that they've never exhibited before. This mother, this queen of the monsters, is terrifying but also beautiful. She's fierce yet also gentle, and she's described as, by the main character, as uncomfortably appealing. So she almost looks hideous because she's so monstrous, but at the same time she's stunningly beautiful, which is quite a good, I guess, physical representation of what a sorceress is. So I'm going to quote here from the book, quote, "Mother loves all her children, but sometimes children need to be punished," is what she says to them, these four kings, before she quite easily kills all of them. All these four kings of the monsters. And then all of these hideous monsters, not the kings but the other monsters, affectionately run to her, and she pets them and tells them that she loves them and calls them her babies. She asks several humans to join her side, to join the cause of the monsters, but she asks each of them first if they love her. This is very important to her, that they love her, not just the monsters but the humans as well. It's almost like if you want to join her side, she asks, "Do you love me?" And I'm going to quote again, she also says, quote, "Mother has glorious things in store for little babies who want to stay and demonstrate their love and devotion. To those that join her, the earth is a treasure chest overflowing with meaty treats, and Mother's little helpers can take as much as they want." End quote. See, unlike the kings before her, having lots of creatures at her beck and call is not enough. She also wants their hearts and minds to belong to her. She wants them to worship and adore her. She uses temptation in order to get people on her side, the promise of love and rewards, rather than the threat of death as the kings before her used. Also, I think that quote is important in showing the mentality of the sorceress. Yes, she wants control, she wants to take over the earth, but she doesn't want to take it over and implement her own system of total dominion over it. A strict system, like a sorcerer might. She doesn't want to put rules and restrictions and regulations, in other words, order, on her subjects. She wants them to run wild. She delights in complete abandon, total chaos. She doesn't really care what her followers do, just as long as they are hers, they remain hers, heart and soul. If that is the case, then the world is their playground. It's almost like she cares more about their inner world. Are their hearts and minds and souls hers? And if that's the case, then she doesn't care what their actions are. They can do whatever the hell they want. She wants who they are to be devoted to her, whereas a sorcerer probably wouldn't care so much about what's in your heart or mind. Of course, it all varies, but wouldn't care as much. It's more about what are your actions. Are you know, doing what I want, what I say? I don't care what you're thinking or feeling. Don't get this confused though, because I know it sounds a lot like, oh, do what you want, just love me. It's not freedom that she's offering them. By offering them to give in, you can have everything you desire, all these dark desires, just be mine. It's not freedom that she's offering them, though it might initially sound like it. And it might initially sound like it as well compared to what the sorcerer offers. No, just like the sorcerer, she too wants control. It's just control of a different sort. She wants to infect the world. She wants to create the world in her own image. And though it may seem like her followers have wildness and freedom, they don't. All they want to do is please her, which is what she commands of them, and everything they do will be motivated by trying to please her. So that's what she wants. She's like, do what you want as long as everything you do isn't an attempt to please me. Sort of a bit like that. It will be her world, and she will totally control everyone and everything in it. It will be chaos in that it will reflect her own twisted mind and her own dark desires. So it says on my script that I recently read Night Film. At the time of writing this, I recently read Night Film. I read it back in October. I mentioned it in my books of 2018 list because it's a fantastic book, one of the best books I've read in a while. And it was weird because I was reading it as I was writing this video, and it's crazy how well it fits. I was already writing it before I started reading the book, and I was reading the book, I was like, wow, this fits so well with the video I'm writing. So the book centres around a film director known as Cordova. His horror films are a brilliant world of chaos. He's one of the best sorceresses that I've come across in a long time. And a great way to show that a sorceress, first of all, does not have to be female, and secondly, that a sorceress's power does not come from her looks or sexuality, but from intelligence and emotion. Cordova reels people in by tapping into their deepest emotions and enticing them into his dream world, where all is confusing and terrifying and nothing is as it seems. The way his dark horror movies are described in the book, it's like he owns people's souls when they watch his films. He owns their hearts and minds. They have, for the duration of the movie, become his, to draw into his disturbed world and do with them what he will. Even after the movie has ended, he has planted a little seed of obsession into the hearts and minds of those who have seen his films. Life is never the same, the book tells us, after watching a Cordova movie. You have been infected by him. You yearn for this horrifically delicious world he has allowed you to have a glimpse of. Long after the screen goes black, you can't stop thinking about it. And this is how his many worshippers were born. It is their adoration, their obsession that built his career. It is this he thrives off. So in classic sorcerer sense, not only does he act like a sorceress, not only does he act like a sorceress in his methods, but also what he wants from life, from the world, from the people around him, their adoration is also the same thing as what the sorceress wants, because that's what a sorceress's power and control is built on. Controlling people, getting them to worship her, adore her. It's like him, his career is built off this worship and adoration of people. Well, how could it not be? If people didn't, enjoy his films, didn't adore it, then he wouldn't have a career, he wouldn't have any power. So in the first video, I've already mentioned the gentleman with the thistle-down hair from Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and yes, that is as close to a name as we get with him, the gentleman. So he is a wonderfully polite and beautifully strange psychopath, enticing and unearthly. Though he does sometimes use threats, yes, more often than not he uses temptation, offering his friends, and I use the words friends very loosely, offering his friends riches and their heart's desires, luring them away to a beautiful world where they can dance just for his amusement. He is mad, very mad, unpredictable and unhinged. He just makes it up as he goes along, working through feelings. The gentleman's chaotic fairy world is that of the sorceress. And again, that's another thing. Sorceresses in a lot of cases seem to make things up as they go along. Play it by ear seems to be their thing. They manipulate people and go, okay, let's, I guess, see how it goes. Whereas a sorcerer seems to have a plan from the beginning and goes, this, and this is... Not in all cases, but that seems to be sort of their methods. The sorcerer has a plan from the beginning and that's how it's going to be, that's his end point. Whereas with a sorceress, like the gentleman, it's like they're just making it up as they go along. Both methods work though, seem to work. So the Cuckoo from the Sandman comics or graphic novels by Neil Gaiman is a sorceress. And she, and I say she because she's presented as feminine mainly throughout in the comic she's in, even though technically no gender is given for the actual being she is, but she is presented as feminine for a lot of it. She manipulated people by getting them to adore her. And not because she's beautiful, because she's not. She doesn't even really have any form, but because she's an entity who literally lives inside your subconscious, feeding off you and controlling you subtly for many years. It's very interesting that in Gaiman's Sandman, in this particular comic, that the Cuckoo is shown as a being who lives in your subconscious, because sorceresses in general seem to work through the realm of the subconscious. That seems to be very much their world. Sort of what's unseen, what's unknown, things that are hidden, subtle manipulations, which is the Cuckoo. She lives inside your subconscious. The Cuckoo just looks at people and instantly they would do anything for her. They would die for her. And some of them, in fact, do. It's sort of like the power of the sorceress and the feelings that the sorceress inspires in people. It's sort of like an extreme version of being in love, I think. That's how I'd say it. Obviously very unhealthy and obsessive love, but it's almost like there's a lot of the power the sorceress seems to inspire is like sort of madness and mad adoration, and you're not thinking straight and you just complete worship, and yeah, that kind of thing. And as I said before, this when you get right down to it is all the sorceress wants, is for you to feel like that for you to be hers, mind, body and soul. Why? Not because she cares about you, but because it gives her power, because that's where her power comes from. People falling at her feet. The sorcerer generally doesn't care whether or not you love him or hate him, so long as you're slaving away for him and building his evil empire, by contrast. Whereas the sorceress is a little bit more jealous than sorcerers. They do care, because that's where their power comes from, not from commanding people, Although they can do that as well. As I said, there's so much overlap. In a way, the sorceress, even though she's subtler, in some senses, it's a subtler kind of magic, a subtler kind of tyranny, and a subtler kind of control. in a lot of ways and in a lot of stories, she's almost more scary than the sorcerer. Because the truest kind of freedom is freedom over your own heart and mind. No one can truly own you if you at least have that, if you're at least free in your own body and your own mind, your own heart and soul, or whatever you want to call it. And the sorceress wants to take that away. If you aren't sovereign over yourself, if you don't have the freedom of emotion to love people, or to be passionate about music or art or whatever the hell it is you're passionate about, then if you don't have that, then you don't have freedom at all. Because the sorceress is a jealous mistress, and you can be damn sure that she will not allow any room in your heart or mind for anyone but her. In a lot of cases, anyway. She wants to become your whole world, because that means more power for her, and she wants to make you dance for her own amusement. The sorceress shows affection more readily than the sorcerer, it is true, but just to be clear, she doesn't actually care about anyone but herself. She has pets, and that is it. So let's contrast this, as I said, these sort of, I guess, these mad fairylands. Those worlds sort of briefly described as, I'd say, sorceress worlds, like the Other Mother's World and Coraline, Fairyland and Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. They seem to be very much nonsensical, horrifying, chaotic. Worlds of the Sorceress is very much how I describe them, and they're queens, or kings as it were, are sorceresses. Let's contrast that with the world of Big Brother, or The Matrix, which are very much sorcerer worlds. And I should have talked about, I debated whether to talk about Big Brother in the sorcerer video, or this video. Even though I'm going to go off and talk a little bit about a sorcerer now. And the reason I didn't include it in the first video is because I think it's better for me to contrast the world of Big Brother with the world of a sorceress, so you can sort of see them side by side of how different they are. Yeah, these worlds are like The Matrix. Spoiler for The Matrix, if you haven't seen it. Until I put my hand down, spoiler for The Matrix. Obviously the Matrix world being, of course, not the world, the computer world where they're in, but when they awake from being in the simulation and they realise that all of humanity is in these little pods, and the Earth has been destroyed and there are these robots controlling everything. That's a sorcerer world in the sense that it's robots controlling everything, everything's sort of barren and dead, there's clear rules and restrictions, everything is just as it is and there's almost no life anymore. So that world of the Matrix, the world of the robots, and then, spoilers done, and then the world of Big Brother as well. These worlds are not chaotic, the world of Big Brother and the Matrix. They're not chaotic. These worlds have clear rules. They're reasonable worlds, worlds with logic, clear logic and rules that must be followed. They're horrible rules and oppressive rules. Still rules, but yeah, horrible and oppressive. It's like the world of a machine is the world of a sorcerer. It's like obey would be the motto of that, it's obey. So Big Brother from George Orwell's novel 1984 is definitely a dystopian version of the evil, all-powerful, all-controlling and all-seeing sorcerer. As I said in the first video, there are a few elements that make a sorcerer a sorcerer. If you've forgotten, if you want to, you can go back and look at that list and the different points I made that makes a sorcerer, and you can compare and with Big Brother, because I think pretty much every point, you know, fits a lot of the points. So, as I said, Big Brother, the thing about Big Brother is that Big Brother is not even a person. Big Brother is just an idea, a symbol. Merely, he's just a symbol, a personification of the government. But Big Brother is an idea believed so strongly by everyone, even the government itself, that Big Brother has become almost a tangible entity, almost a god. In this sense, Big Brother is one of the purest examples of a sorcerer, one of the purest archetypes to be found in literature of a sorcerer, because Big Brother never has been and never will be human. Never has been and never will be a human being, an individual person. All it, because that's what it is an it, all it lives for is power and dominance. That's all it wants and feeds on. And it becomes a very real sort of entity, even though technically it doesn't exist. It's almost given life by all this. So in this sense, it's a very pure symbol of ultimate power, what the sorcerer archetype stands for. And it doesn't even matter that Big Brother, strictly speaking, doesn't even exist. The effect that it has on the world is the same as if it were a real person who existed. Big Brother represents the obsessive need for control that is the collective consciousness of the people in Orwell's society. With Big Brother's thought police who can almost literally see inside your head, the collective almost spell of obedience cast on everyone, the manipulation of people's emotions, and Big Brother's control of objective fact, and even how people perceive reality. The level of control Big Brother exerts is almost supernatural. So even though he's technically not a magical sorcerer. In the sense he doesn't have magical powers, he kind of does. So yeah, just like all sorcerers and sorceresses are a mixture of both, so are their worlds. Neither total order nor total chaos, but according to their rulers' methods, they do lean more heavily one way or the other. So one world, the world of the sorceress, is a total, in my opinion, is a total embracing of all of the darkest emotions and base instincts without restraint or conscience, which is harmful. And the other world, which is the world of the sorcerer, is a complete rejection of all this, of all these emotions and instincts, a complete rejection of all emotions and feelings and humanity of any kind, which is equally as harmful. I think one is almost diving too deeply into every single emotion and instinct and embracing all and running wild, and in that sense, and the sorcerer is like no emotions, no nothing, no, squash it all out. Both bad. They are both of these worlds very dark places to be, and I wouldn't wish either of them on my worst enemy. Not that I have a worst enemy, but if I did. So it's the classic, the sorcerer and the sorceress and their worlds. It's the old yin-yang thing of chaos versus order, the traditional feminine chaos and the traditional masculine order. Neither one of them is good in their extremes. It is through balance between them that harmony is achieved. I know in my other video in the comments, a lot of people of course mentioned Jordan Peterson and how he draws comparisons between obviously female chaos and masculine order. And I do want to say, yeah, he has popularised the idea in recent years, but that's by no means a new concept. That association of female with chaos and male with order, and the yin-yang, chaos versus order, that's a concept that's thousands of years old. But of course, credit where credit's due, and I do find his stuff really interesting when he talks about that kind of thing, chaos and order, and archetypes and storytelling and stuff like that. I find that very interesting, stuff that he's got to say about it. So yeah, I mean, I know he's a controversial figure, but if anyone's interested in hearing what he's got to say on, I guess, archetypes and stuff like that, he's quite interesting on that, so I don't know, yeah. So all good art, of course, reflects life, or symbolises something profound. It gives us a warning or information or whatever it happens to be. And I think the reason that the evil sorcerer and sorceress are such powerful archetypes which resonate so much in stories and come back again and again and again, and why they've lasted for so many thousands of years across all cultures, or most cultures anyway, is because they are true. So you get people in real life who put the control of others and a desire for power over everything else, and the result is always horrific. So Hitler is someone, I'd argue, is a real life example of this trope, of this archetype, of a sorcerer. He sought to create a world of order, I guess you could call it, a world he wanted to rule over, and nothing was ever enough. He always wanted more power and more control. So much so that he believed that he had the right to decide who lived and who died. To decide what kinds of people, what sorts of DNA should be allowed to flourish in the human race. To decide who should be allowed to live and reproduce. So that's the scary thing. You know, sorcerers are beings from fantasy and fairy tales, and we don't ever imagine they could exist in real life, I guess, characters like Voldemort or whatever, but of course people like that have existed. And as I said, the only thing that makes a sorcerer is not magic powers. They don't need magic powers. All they need is a desire for control above all else, and I'd argue Hitler seems to fit a lot of that. And then on a smaller level we have Jim Jones, the Jonestown cult leader who convinced, and I can't remember how many people it was, I think it was something like 900 people. He convinced all of these people to commit suicide, including getting them to, you know, kill their children as well. After months of brainwashing them and exerting such an intense level of control over them that they'd do anything he commanded, I'd say cult leaders in general I'd argue have a nasty habit of falling into sorcerer tendencies. So I think that's why this trope comes up again and again, because we see it in real life, and it's almost like a warning in stories, you know, of I guess, don't trust people like this, or this is what happens when you go too far down this path, I guess, and I think that's why perhaps it resonates so much with us. So there are sorceresses in real life too, though they are generally harder to spot than sorcerers because that is their nature. For example, we have Elizabeth Bathory, I think that's how you pronounce it. She was a noblewoman who supposedly slaughtered young girls and bathed in their blood to keep herself looking younger. We have Lucrezia Borgia. I'm so bad at pronouncing foreign words, I'm so sorry. Lucrezia Borgia. Anyway, she was the bastard daughter of a corrupt pope, and she apparently used to poison people in order to get what she wanted. So good sorceresses from history though, as I said, these women, there's a lot of arguments about whether they actually did do these things they're accused of doing, and were they actually good, or were they just slandered by people around them and there were lies told about them? Who knows? But that's the thing, that's the nature of a sorceress. So good sorceresses from history are hard to find. For if they've done their job well, you should either have never heard about their manipulations and evil deeds, or be questioning if they were the ones responsible. Or perhaps blaming their evil deeds on someone else entirely because someone else took the blame for it. The facts should be muddied. Their manipulations should be so subtle that you don't know what they set into motion, what they did and didn't do. You don't know if someone may have taken the blame for something that they were manipulated into, or whether the sorceress was blamed for setting things in motion that she never had anything to do with. A sorceress can morph into an angel, and like Cleopatra, Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth Woodville, we will never know if they were villains or heroines, cruel manipulators or innocent victims, or perhaps a bit of both. They are shapeshifters by nature, elusive, beautiful, and inspiring both undying adoration and vicious hatred. Like fairies, shadows, and smoke, the feminine aspect of the sorcerer is harder to spot and a lot subtler than her heavier-handed male counterpart, leaving you wondering whether or not she was truly there. She, or indeed he, as I said, a sorceress can be a man, is a beautiful nightmare that you yearn for and despise, a disturbing dream you desperately want to wake from, while also dreading that it will end. I imagine the world of the sorcerer to be sort of like the military, really strict and often brutal, where everything is meticulously controlled with endless rules. The world of the sorceress I think of as the hell of all these old paintings, you know, where you see sort of all these twisted bodies all twisted up with blood and death and destruction and demons and dancing and wildness and horror and torture, all that kind of stuff. Sort of like an enticing and repulsive party with debauchery and death and horrific nonsense, empty of morality and sense. It's like the sorcerer wants to completely dominate his victims, whereas the sorceress wants to completely infect them. Both are just different expressions of the same thing. They want complete control. So I think it's important to understand these archetypes, the sorcerer and the sorceress, not just as tools for a story, but to use them properly, you must understand all that they represent. What are you trying to say and show in your story? Don't just have an evil sorcerer in your story because you need a bad guy and the evil sorcerer is the bad guy as old as time. Understand all that he or she represents and the archetypal story beneath his struggle with the hero. Someone commented on my other video that these characters are cliche villains, sorcerers, and well, they were referring to sorcerers on that video. I think that they only are if you write a black cloak wearing sorcerer while not understanding what he represents. As I've said, there's plenty of characters who you wouldn't expect to be a sorcerer who have a sorcerer archetypes who are different enough that they appear in a whole number of ways. They don't wear a black cloak and cackle and rub their hands together and, you know, they're different, but they fall into the sorcerer archetype. And I think the character only becomes a cliche if you don't really understand what the point of it is in your story. If you just want a bad guy, but you're not fully appreciating what that stands for, what the archetype stands for. And then I think that's why it's a cliche, because you're writing this character on a really surface level, a really shallow level, and I think the reader can really sense that when there's not an understanding of the character. I think that's when they're badly done and badly written, because then they do become cliches, because it's, I think, sort of lazy writing. You want someone evil who's going to take over the world, but it's not really good enough for a villain. You need to understand them, what, you know. Well, like, there's examples of real people in history like that, real people, and probably real people you know like that. Obviously, I'm not saying we all know Hitler's walking around everywhere. That would be ridiculous, but there'll be people you know in your life, perhaps not, but who have those traits to a certain extent. Obviously, I'm not implying that there'll be, hopefully not anyone as evil as that walking around, but there will be, to a certain extent, people who are like sorceresses, manipulative and need to be adored all the time and like to control people that way. And then you see, you know, I think everyone has those traits though to an extent, and I think I'm going off on a tangent now. I will stop myself. But And I think it's in understanding those parts of yourself, because everyone has aspects to the sorcerer and the sorceress. Everyone can be a tyrant and also a manipulator. Everyone has that. It's just learning how to control those aspects of yourself and not allowing yourself to become a horrific villain, really. But it's in understanding those desires and that desire for power and control. I think that's when you can write a good sorcerer that's not a cliche, is my point. And it only becomes a cliche when you don't understand the point of the archetype, and that really irritates me when writers do that. It's like, what's the point of, you know, you're taking this thing that has all this history attached to it and it stands for something, it's a symbol is what it is. Like Big Brother, it's a symbol of an idea, and if you're going to represent that idea but you don't even know what it is, the idea that you're representing, then yes, it will be a cliche because you haven't understood it and you've just written about it in such a surface level way, was my point. And I'm gonna stop now because it's not what it's about and I'm going off script. And my throat really hurts. Continuing. So, the sorceress works through pleasure and the sorcerer through pain, though ultimately they're offering the same thing, enslavement to their will. The lesson the sorcerer and the sorceress are there to teach us, both in stories and in real life, is that no one has the right to control you, and you should never allow them to. The lesson they are there to teach us is that the only way to live, the only way life can be fair and just and good, is if you, and only you, are sovereign over your own inner world, your mind and heart and soul, and also over your outer world, your body, your actions and your life. And that you yourself allow other people freedom to be sovereign over themselves, their inner worlds, to think whatever thoughts they want to think, and feel whatever they want to feel, and act however they want to act, so long as it doesn't impinge on, obviously, other people's freedoms, or hurt people, then, you know, free will, I guess. So yeah, don't allow yourself to be either dominated or manipulated, for both are forms of control. The sorcerer and the sorceress of stories teach us how to defeat them in real life. I don't think a better example can be given than in the movie Labyrinth. At the final confrontation between our brave heroine and the Goblin King, we have reached a point where one of them must finally win. He wants her to submit to him completely, wants to own her, and she wants her freedom and her brother back, but it's mainly about her freedom. The golden words that she speaks are all that is needed to defeat the evil sorcerer or sorceress. It is not the words that are important, but the realization that goes along with them, the realization that she does not have to let herself be controlled, that indeed the sorcerer or sorceress has no power without the willingness of those to give over their autonomy. You have no power over me, are the words that she tells him, the Goblin King, and the game is up. With those words, that's it. The illusions of the sorcerer have been seen through, the curtain has been pulled back, and the wizard exposed. The truth has been revealed. The truth that the only way a sorcerer or a sorceress can control you is if you allow them to. The Goblin King backs away, his almighty magic crumbling to dust in the face of someone who is the sole authority over themselves and their life. The words, "You have no power over me," when facing an evil sorcerer or sorceress, are the only magic words that matter. Thank you very much for watching. That's the end of that video. Filmed for the second time. My throat is so sore. I'm in so much pain. My voice is so sore now after that. I did have several video ideas. I have this video that I've filmed twice already. It's about my favourite opening lines in books. I filmed it twice already and I've lost the footage each time, so I'm gonna have to film it for a third time. And I know some people were saying in my last video, my books of 2018, I had a comment from someone who was really angry about the fact that my new videos are apparently very lazy and that not as well thought out as my old videos. Which irritated me slightly, just because I haven't changed my video style. I'm still going to be making the same videos I always have, and the fact is those lazy videos, if I hadn't have made them, they didn't take up from the time that I would have spent doing on another video. Those videos were a lot quicker than other videos. If I hadn't have made them, basically, there would be no video, so it's not like they're a stand-in for another better video, they're just time fillers for when a video that takes me a very, very long time to work on, like my Cassandra Clare series, for example, took me several months to get done and finished and write and analyse a whole bloody series of books. These lazy videos, where it's like my favourite books of 2018 or whatever, or my Q&A, which my Q&A was a celebration because like 20,000, no it was, well, that was my celebration for being a year on YouTube. So, I mean, if I can't do a fun video then, when can I? So just to say, for anyone who's getting annoyed by my more recent videos, that's not how my videos are gonna be. That's not like, oh, now I can't bother anymore in making those videos. That's, no. First of all, I'd quite like to do fun videos sometimes. I mean, if you really don't like it and it pisses you off that much, you don't have to watch them. You can just watch the ones that I put more effort into. But other people seem to enjoy the lazier ones as well. So, but again, I'm not stopping the more thought out ones. The more thought out ones will still be happening, but they just take so bloody long to do that to fill time in between the months that it takes me before each one well thought out video is released, I'd quite like to do some like more fun ones about literature. And I still like to think that there's some level of thought that I've put into them. So, I don't know, but if it annoys you that much, that's fine. I think that's everything. I just ranted for a long time, I'm sorry. Twitter and Instagram will be linked down below. I never check Twitter. I deleted it from my phone in November and I haven't been back on it since. I'm sorry, I suck, so you can follow me if you want. Don't see why you should, honestly, with Twitter, because there's no point. Instagram, I'm sometimes there. Right, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video on evil sorceresses. I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to get that to you, but it has. Thus is life, this is the nature of life, you know. Well, during that time is to when I uploaded the sorcerer video. I then expected to like get the sorcerer video edited, but I had my dissertation, and literally from October to then like January when it was due, I've been working flat out getting my dissertation done, which was handed in January, and then pretty much from January till like now, which is mid-February, I've had another project that I've literally been working on. So yeah, but I've managed to make this now because it's not as... I've finished my dissertation, so yeah. But as I said, once I finished uni, as I said in my end of the year 2018 video, and I said in that video that I wasn't making any promises about when I'd be making more content, that hopefully I'd like to make more content, which I will, but it might just take until I finish uni for that to become more regular. But again, I don't know where life will take me. I'm at that stage in my life where everything is just unknown. I'm about to leave university and be a grown-up for the first time. And I don't know what I'm doing, what job I'm gonna have, what's happening. Everything is very up in the air. Right, this is the stage in my life where I have no idea what's going on. So, we'll see. It will be an exciting adventure, I hope, and not result in multiple breakdowns. And anyway, I need to stop talking. Oh my god. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope I managed to get it up soon. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.